Today we have Dr. Steve Taylor from LSE, and thank you for joining us. We have a few questions about your subject, your life, and what joins them together. Dr. Taylor, would you mind telling Aspire Magazine and its readers what makes you think, who are you?
As far as sociology is concerned, I was studying history at school, and one day went into the library and I read a little pamphlet about the French Revolution by a guy called Georges Roudet. What he was doing was he was showing how, although there was a set of historical facts, there was a French Revolution, people were killed, different historians interpreted it in very different ways. And this was like, it's so obvious to say it now, 30 years down the line, but to me then at school, it was a revelation that you can take a piece of information and you can see it from many different lenses. And that got me interested in. So history, for example, is as much about the historian as what happened, because he's looking at it lens. And to understand anything in life, I think you have to understand the people, what the people looking at it are seeing, because there's no such thing as an innocent interpretation. Anyone would have their values and beliefs, and that shapes how we see it. So the idea, there's not a set of facts you learn in history, there's a set of interpretations of history, was a new idea to me. And that's what drew me to sociology, because it's one of the things that sociology says, is that we see the same reality differently. So that's how I started getting interested in sociology. I did a sociology degree at Leicester University and I got a scholarship to do research. And my area then was crime and law. And I thought, well, I don't really know enough about this, so I did a law degree part-time in the evenings to up my knowledge, to help me understand crime, how crime works, how the law works. So my background is sociology, psychology and law. Those are the two subjects that I studied. And I've done that with crime and also with health, how laws can influence health. So that's my background, really. That's how I came to social sciences rather than biology or history, which was my original interest.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's quite interesting. So, sociology and crime. What's the tie-in? What joins them together?
Well, a lot of reasons, really. A lot of things, really. I mean, I think that one of the things sociology does is to take the familiar, everyday world around us and look at it slightly differently. You don't go into the biology as a biologist would do, or the chemistry. You take the everyday world of shopping malls and coffee bars and restaurants and families, and you look at it differently. So if I take my glasses off, you look different. I put my glasses on, I see a different image of you. It's a little bit the same. So our first thought with crime might be, why are people committing crime? And that's a good question. And the sociologist is interested in that. But he or she might say something different. How might crime be functional for society? How might crime do some good? It's a strange thing to say, but this is a point made by a famous sociologist called Durkheim. And he said, actually, by punishing people and saying this is wrong, you're clarifying the boundaries. You're saying this is acceptable, this isn't. A bit the same as when a teacher makes an example of a child in school and she takes his mobile phone off him. That's the rules. So in some ways, crime and punishment is reinforcing the rules. So that doesn't mean to say we all think crime is okay, but we have to see it has different functions. The other thing that sociology would do, which is different from criminology, which is why do people commit crime, how can it be stopped, is to say, why are certain things seen as crimes? Why in Britain, for example, 50 years ago, were we looking at homosexuals and saying you're criminals, while now they're having marriage and children, and everyone thinks it's fine, adoption. So you can only understand crime through the culture, because it's the culture says that's a crime, that's not. So although sociologists are interested in why we do it, they're also interested in why things are seen as a crime or not seen as a crime, and also the fact that in some ways it has a positive function. So it's asking different questions about the familiar.
That's really enlightening. Wow. You also co-wrote a guidebook, right, at LSE with Mrs. Rosie Gosling, and you specified a particular question in the first few pages. What is sociology? That is a vast question, I can assume. Would you care to give our readers a synopsis of the meaning of this word? I know you already started, saying something about it. If you were to describe sociology in a few words, just a few words, would it be possible?
Yeah, indeed. That's one of the things we have to look at, and one of the things we say to students is it's a subject which you have to understand. It's a set of thinking skills. It's not a learning subject like law. It's a thinking subject. So basically, I would say the idea behind sociology, it's one of the subjects that tries to explain why we think and behave in the way we do. It's a social science. what makes sociology distinctive is the argument that you can't understand my behaviour or your behaviour in isolation from the societies in which we live. And the sociologist builds up this argument as follows. We're born into cultures, into societies, where there are a set of rules and values. And through our families, through school, through college, through magazines, popular culture, we begin to learn these rules. We learn what's acceptable and what's not, what's good and what's bad. That's called culture. So we learn about our culture, and to some extent, that makes us who we are. So sociology is arguing really you can only understand people in relation to social groups, social institutions, because we're linked into them. You can't separate them out. That's the starting point for sociology.
Huge springboard, actually. Right. In universities all around the world, studying, secondary school, post-secondary, whatever, one of the most important things that one might mention would be managing your time. Even after you graduate, when you start working, I think time management is of the essence. Okay, otherwise you'll be losing so much from what you can actually do. But one of the main problems with our students is how they manage it. They're still young. They want to do so much in so little time. Yet sometimes they try to do some things, prioritize some things which are not really the priorities in their life. Any hints which might help these unhappy students, because they are trying their best, but they're not really there, they're not really getting there, which might help them do better in their future studies?
Okay, well I think people are different. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for other people.
Yeah.
But I'd break that question down. I'd say the first one is motivation. I would get students to write down why they came on this programme, because they want a good job, because they're interested, because their parents wanted them to. I would say you work out why you came. That's your prime motive. And when things get difficult, when things get tough, you go and look at that and you say, am I doing this right? Why am I not working when I want a good job, a good degree? So there's the motivation factor. You've got to want it. So you've got to look yourself in the mirror and say, do I really want this? And I would say to students, you get one chance in life. You don't have a second, a third, and a fourth chance. You're only going to be young, with your brain fairly plastic still open to information.
Exactly.
It's not going to be the same forever. You've got to make the best use of that. So part of it is like a sports player, you motivate. But the second thing I would say is learning and working is much easier when you do it habitually. If you're sitting there thinking, I ought to do some work, but there's a football match on, there's my girlfriend on the phone, you program certain times in the day, 6:30 to 9 o'clock, whatever it is, that's your work time. There's certain things we do automatically. We brush our teeth, we go to work, we have breakfast, they're habits, we don't have to think about them. This is your washing time, your teeth time. Same with work, you have to plan times in your work times. That's much better time management than every time thinking, oh, I've got to start work and I don't want to. If that time's there, you slot into it. I think you organise that time. You say, Monday, Tuesday is sociology, Wednesday, Thursday is economics. In that sense, the timetable guides you. You're not struggling to do some work. The third thing I'd say to students is that with sociology, I'm not talking about other subjects, it's a thinking subject. You have to have positive, interactive learning. Ask yourself questions. You've got your subject guide out. Socialisation comes up. Do I know what that is? Work with someone else. Ask each other questions. So all the time, you're not trying to absorb information like a sponge. You're trying to think about these core concepts. So for me, it's motivation, it's good habits, and it's actually thinking, asking yourself questions about what you're doing. And in that way, the subject becomes more interesting. It becomes more enjoyable rather than a chore that we have to do. So those would be my 3 bits of advice about organising yourself.
Great bits of advice, actually.
What worked for me doesn't work for everybody.
True. But then again, I really like one part of what you just said, which is you can't really study sociology. You have to think about it and see to try to understand, because most students try to just put the study guide over there and just study everything, line by line. It doesn't work like that. It might work for an exam, perhaps, but then for...
I'm not sure it does. I'm not sure it does, Joe, because the examiner won't say, tell me about Durkheim, Marx. They'll say, how do you apply this theory to a social problem? And if you've got that thinking skill, you've got the flexibility to go in different directions. If you've learned it, you're like a train on a train line.
That's it.
If the question is right, you'd be lucky. If the question is slightly different from what you expect, it wouldn't work so well. So I think you have to think, it's a little bit like learning to swim. It seems so difficult when you're a kid. But once you can swim, you can swim. Once you understand some key ideas in sociology, it opens up the doors.
And just do it naturally, basically.
It's thinking, not
really
learning.
do.
Law was learning, I accept that. Sociology was thinking.
That's right. Finally, memories, footprints in the snow. Tonight's lecture. A very particular title, to say the least. Would you care to give us, Aspire, a head start on tonight's public?
Well, Sandra said, do you want to give a talk? I was actually working on memory at the time, so without thinking, I just said memory. Possibly I might have got something different. Memory is like our footprints of the past. It's the way we look back on the life we've lived. But if you imagine a life without memory, every day would be a total surprise to you. You'd have no narrative, no story. So the idea of memories being like footprints is very well known in poetry and things. Why did I say in the snow? Because what we're looking at here is the idea that memory is much more fragile and precarious than we accept. For most people, memory is like a video recorder. You spin the tape back to see what happened last year, when you first met your wife, when you first went to school. But psychologists have shown that memory is not like that. It has to be reinvented each time. It's very fragile, precarious. You have to rethink it. And a number of things. Memory is very unreliable. Secondly, we always look at memory through the lens of the present. If you're looking back, your view of what happened in the past is coloured by your view of the present. So if you're very happily married and you're thinking about your first date with the man or woman you married, that's a glowing day. Exactly. 10 years down the line, you're a bit of divorce, you'll look back at that first day very differently. So memories are seen through the lens of the present. But what psychologists have also shown is that memories can be altered by the very way a question is asked. When you ask witnesses about a crime in one way, they'll give you one answer, and they'll give you a different answer if the question is asked differently. Let me give you an example. Students were asked to look at a film of two cars colliding, not dangerously, but bumping into each other. When the students were asked, how fast do you think the cars were going when they smashed into each other, they give you quite a high speed. When you change the word to bumped or hit, the estimate of speed comes right down. The questions influence the memory. And the other thing that psychologists have shown is that you can plant false memories into people. You can say, did you see that? Did you remember this? And some people will remember things that weren't there. So the idea that I'm looking at in the talk, and it's a very controversial issue in psychology, is can we have false memories? Can we sincerely and genuinely remember things that never happened? And why this was such a controversial issue in the 1990s is lots of women, a few men, but mainly women, were going into therapy with depression and eating disorders and tension and stress. And the therapist was saying, do you know, every woman that comes in with that condition has been sexually abused. Maybe it happens to you. And suddenly you got these women who were remembering 20, 30, 40 years ago being abused by their father, their scoutmaster, their teacher. And of course these guys were getting hauled in and put into prison. And the question is, were these women really remembering something they'd hidden away? It's called repression in psychology, and the therapist was drawing it out. Or were the therapist's questions making them believe they'd been abused and they never had been?
Well, it could have been something
natural. It was just an imagination. The therapist planted the idea under hypnosis, and the woman came out of therapy believing it. Now, that's what the talk's about. Can we imagine things that are not there? If the answer's no, then these women really were harmed. If the answer is yes, I could plant a false memory in you, then probably the therapist. And it's about a woman called Elizabeth Loftus who fought this battle almost on her own against the recovered memory therapists who were, I mean, the thousands and thousands of women who were remembering abuse from 20, 30 years ago. She fought a lone battle initially against these therapists, and she had death threats. She was dismissed from her job, and there was a lot of things happened to her. And the talk tonight will tell the story of this battle. That's what it's about.
And you leave us in the suspense. I love it. Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for this time that you have given us. I know that you are really, packed full of events to happen in these next 2 days. You're staying here till tomorrow?
Only till Sunday, yeah.
Only till Sunday, yeah. So I wish you a really nice day. I hope you like our little island, our weather especially.
Beautiful.
And I hope that we see you again sometime in the future.
Well, thank you for asking me, for asking. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Cheers.